My name is Saju. I'm here from RightMesh. It's been a really exciting 5 days here at India Blockchain Week. Started out with the hackathon on Friday. A lot of you were there as well, and now culminating in the last day of the conference is really interesting. A lot of learnings. It is really good. Really good event overall. So I've already had the pleasure to talk to a number of you yesterday. I'm hoping to connect with a lot of you today as well. We are from RightMesh. We are building a mobile mesh networking product that will connect users, their mobile devices, peer-to-peer without the need for any kind of centralized infrastructure or access to the central network. Now, I'm not going to talk about RightMesh in this talk. I could talk about the product, why we built it, who's it for, etc. But I think more than that, I think it's really important to talk about the far-reaching impacts of what blockchain is really about. Because this is a blockchain conference and the technology itself is very new, sometimes it's very difficult to understand, what is the impact of blockchain or what's the impact that's going to have in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line. I mean, there's been excellent discussion so far in the conference about how blockchain is going to help in terms of governance, in terms of financial services, supply chain management, but we also need to think about areas apart from that. So, the particular topic that I'm going to talk about is sharing economies, and if you've done some kind of reading about blockchain, sharing economy, empowering true sharing economies is one of the big drivers behind blockchain technology, and that it can really make a difference. So I'm going to talk about that because that's basically where RightMesh is also. We are building a type of sharing economy. I'm also going to talk about how blockchain fits in, why does blockchain empower a sharing economy, and then finally, let's talk about what's the impact that it has in the developing world. We are a blockchain conference in India. Let's talk about what is the potential impact that it can have in a developing nation like India and other parts of the world. So, starting with sharing economy. So when we talk about sharing economies, the first kind of companies that come to mind are naturally Airbnb and Uber. And these, of course, are revolutionary companies because they have changed the whole centralized approach where companies, organizations basically produce goods and services and sell that into the market. Whereas companies like Airbnb, Uber, and others, they basically are different. The one thing that they have in common is the contributions of the users of the platform basically add value to other people, right? So they're basically giving up their services or resources in order to benefit other people in the platform. Good model, but there's a problem with this model. The problem is the value that is produced by the crowd is not equally redistributed among all of those, all the people who are in it. So you look at the valuation of a company like Airbnb or Uber. Last I checked, I think the revenue for Uber was about $6.5 billion for 2016 and 2 point something for Airbnb. Valuations are up the roof. And you see where the wealth is going. Because they are basically managing the platforms and they're controlling the platforms and they're like your intermediate controlling the data, well, they also get to leverage and they get to choose a lot of the profits. And that, in essence, is really not a true peer-to-peer sharing economy. That's not what a real sharing economy is about. A true collaborative economy, where there's cooperation between participants and people, is when a user in that economy qualifies as a producer or a consumer, or another way to put it, as a contributor or a shareholder of the platform. If you think about it, it is a system that is created for the people and by the people. That is an example of a true sharing economy. Such economies do exist, but they're very rare. Because the problem, it's very hard to provide a platform where people can trust each other. You need you need some kind of intermediate that will allow or will guarantee trust between exchanges that happen on the platform. And that's basically what Airbnb, Uber, and a whole bunch of other people are doing. So, it's a challenge. So how does blockchain fit into the picture, right? How does actual blockchain enable a true peer-to-peer sharing economy. So blockchain is interesting, right? We're all here at a blockchain conference. Blockchain as a concept, as a technology, is probably the most confusing, complex, very hard to understand technology that has probably ever existed, because there's so many different concepts. It's very new, very nascent. Everybody has a definition to what blockchain is about, right from being a distributed ledger to the next revolution of the internet, right? It's from one spectrum to the other. At the heart of it, what blockchain really provides, though, we've heard this in probably every panel and every topic so far, is decentralization, right? That's the heart of blockchain. Now, it depends on whether you're a technologist or you're a business person. You can think of it either way. From a technologist perspective, decentralization is actually bringing down centralized servers and replicating user data or any kind of data across multiple nodes across the network so that they're all operating the same thing or have the same kind of data. That's one way to look at decentralization, but it's not that. That's not the important thing. Decentralization is really about decentralization of ownership. And that's what blockchain provides. So it's easy to get those two things mixed up. Now, the benefits that blockchain really provides, it really kind of depends, because we talk about private blockchains that can be used by corporates and enterprises. The thing about blockchain technology, I mean, if you really want to master blockchain, and if you really want to think about the applications and services, the decentralized applications and services that can run on blockchain, you really need to understand the technology, not so much in core, but you have to understand how the technology works and how these benefits are provided in order to think about the applications and services that can be brought. So for example, a private blockchain will not fulfill all of these requirements if you're only working on one node or two nodes. Then there's no difference from that in a centralized server. If you're looking for a company-owned, a system which is owned by an organization or a couple of organizations to secure data, you're probably not going to have any benefit of using a blockchain in that case. There are tons of high-performance, centralized, secure database systems that have been built. So you need to really ensure that you're using blockchain for the right purposes. But the real essence, the power of what blockchain provides are these 5 categories. That data is immutable. It cannot be changed. It's permanent, non-disputable. It can be audited because there's timestamps, there's digital signatures between the data that's being written, and it's globally available to any participant who wants to participate. What this really means is, because of this, the blockchain, it really kind of preempts outside control. You're really kind of not decentralizing the technology, but you're decentralizing ownership when you provide all these benefits. Now, of course, that was the essence behind blockchain. It was initially built, or let's say the technology was initially built to support a cryptocurrency, which was Bitcoin. And the reason probably why a lot of us are here and why there's so much buzz around blockchain in the last 6 months, really in the last 6 months before that, is really about cryptocurrencies. It's probably a good thing because of that, because of the inflation of prices that we've seen in several cryptocurrencies, that has brought a lot of interest from developers, from investors, and that's just kind of accelerating the entire ecosystem. But you look at it, it's not just Bitcoin and Ethereum or Litecoin, it's tons of cryptocurrencies that are out there. We were talking about in the previous panel, I think there's like 2 to 5 ICOs that are launched every day, or even more than that. So every one of these have cryptocurrencies. Are all these going to exist? Probably not. As we see that everything's going to happen, things take time to settle down. But cryptocurrencies are a really important part of blockchain as well. So you look at what blockchain technology does, and that it decentralizes the system. But where does cryptocurrency play the angle? What's the use of the coin? Everybody's raising ICOs to raise a coin. And I mentioned this in my panel yesterday, if you're raising an ICO, you're either doing it for 2 reasons. One is that because you have a really good idea, you want an alternate source of crowdfunding, and you're going for an ICO. In your business model, there's probably no use of a token or a coin. You're just using it as an alternate way of crowdfunding, which is a great idea because it disrupts the VC model. The only thing is that it has to be regulated. And regulations will take time, as we see as the technology matures. That has to happen. The second thing is using it as a token. Using cryptocurrency as a utility token. Now, that's another thing. How do you use cryptocurrency as a token? In what cases would you use cryptocurrency in your token? Well, there's a couple of things for that. Now, Naval Ravikant, who is the CEO of AngelList, we had Utsav just on the previous panel, a man who is, I greatly admire his writings and really just his philosophy of life. But he wrote a very interesting blog post in 2014 called The Fifth Protocol. And in the fifth protocol, he says that cryptocurrencies will create the fifth protocol layer powering the next generation of the internet. What does that mean, the fifth protocol? So today we basically have, if you look at it from the internet perspective, you have 4 layers. If you're from a networking or a computer science background, you know that there's 4 layers to the protocol, to the internet protocol, which is your underlying link layer, your internet protocol layer, IP layer, transport layer, and then your application layer. This is how the internet protocol works today. The thing about the internet protocol is free. Data is free. There is no real value attached to that. And as of which, data just goes back and forth. I am spammed. My Gmail is basically spammed with more spam email than actual mail. I need filters to actually filter out the mail that I need. I'm spammed with advertisements the whole day. Whether it's on YouTube or any other thing on my mobile app, because really there is no value to it. It's just free. People can send whatever information they want. And that's the kind of model that it works today. The fifth protocol that Naval is referring to is a different protocol where you can attach value to communication. So to explain that a little bit more, there was an interesting blog post that followed up in 2016 by a gentleman named Joel Mongero, and he was working for Union Square Ventures at the time. And he came up with this concept called fat protocols. And so what that means is, till now, at least before cryptocurrencies, you had the protocol layer and you had the applications layer. But predominantly, the value has been captured at the applications layer. That means most of the investment has happened at the application layer, and therefore there was more control. The applications layer is controlled by the big giants today, like Google, Facebook, and others. Right? If you make any investment into the protocol layer, it's not there. There's little return. Until cryptocurrencies come about. And you talk about cryptocurrencies, and now blockchain actually kind of switches this, where the value is now at the protocol layer. And what does that mean? Is that because of now the blockchain, you have data, user data, or any kind of other data that needs to be used across multiple systems on an open framework that basically is in a trusted system. So now the protocols are your cryptocurrency protocols, which actually have the value. And this allows for, it actually reduces your barriers to entry. Now, people who have different ideas, different applications, different services can now work on top of the protocols because the protocols can provide incentivization. So, Ethereum is a fat protocol. Filecoin is a fat protocol. Lisk, in that matter, is also a fat protocol. There are applications that are going to be built that can leverage the protocol layer. And therefore, you're actually kind of decentralizing things and taking away control from a few large organizations. So really, it's not just about the exchange of data anymore. It's really adding economic value to the data that you're sending. And this is a hard one to grasp. It took me a long time to actually grasp what this means. And we talked about 21CO in the previous panel, right? And what the business model is. We can argue what the product is, and I kind of agree with it. But the big thing about what 21CO is trying to do is, in order to send a message to someone, I need to make some kind of payment. It sounds weird. Why would I do that? Why is it that I want to send $20 to send a message to somebody, right? When you think about that from a concept, if you need to pay someone to send an email, what happens to all my spam? It just gets removed. No one is going to spam me anymore when I attach value to communication, right? Another example is Brave browser, by the founder of Firefox. And he's come up with a very interesting model where he has implemented ad blockers in the browser, making sure it's fast and speedy. So instead of providing advertisements, where are they going to make their money? Where's the revenue model? Well, you'll pay small micro payments to the providers, to the service providers, to the websites. And that's a really weird model to think about right now, but when you think about it, when it happens at scale, then the service providers have an alternate source of revenue, and they don't have to worry about advertising anymore. Not that it's going to abolish advertising, there has to be a different model for advertising as well, but this just changes the dynamics of things. When you add economic value to the data that you're sending. So that's about blockchain, right? So blockchain really provides areas of two things. From the decentralization of ownership and by providing exchange of value on top of data, right? Which is great. So now what has happened is there has been tons of companies who are trying to replicate existing businesses with the decentralized model, which is good. I'm not saying that it's not. For example, Arcade City, which is now trying to be the decentralized Uber, and you have the decentralized Airbnb, and you have the decentralized social networks. And so you're actually kind of bringing that down. That's good. That's a good place to start. What we really need to think about is how is this going to enable a nation like India, for example, and how can this technology be used to leapfrog it over other economies? So let's start with some data. So this is a stat that came out from Credit Suisse and World Economic Forum. 1% of the country, richest 1%, own 53% of the country's wealth. That's kind of mind-blowing, actually, when you think about it. So this is a serious problem. Now, we think, with all the advancements that has happened in the country, and I've lived here for many years of my life, and to see that entire revolution is a great thing. And we think that the divide is actually reducing. It's not. So in 2000, the richest 1% owned 37% of the country's wealth, whereas in that same year, 2000, about 10% owned maybe 60% of the country's wealth. So what does that mean? The divide is actually getting bigger. The richer are only getting richer. There's a problem there. So basically, the inequality, social and economic, digital divide is actually quite worse than we think. We need to start thinking about that problem. So, as a company, RightMesh, I'm not going to talk into specific things. It's very interesting. Before this conversation, before lunch, I was having a conversation with a group outside, and they were talking about solar energy. Electricity is a big problem. I think it's probably one of the biggest problems, because so many people have a lack of access to electricity. Centralized power grids are not there. But a lot of very innovative, interesting work is happening with solar and solar electricity and how you can enable a sharing economy. But I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about what we're doing in RightMesh, and our objective is kind of to reduce the digital divide in that case. So what does that mean, the digital divide? So this just gives you a picture from Akamai about the average connection speed. It's recent data, I just pulled it off this morning, and kind of gives you a picture of where we are in terms of overall speeds. Naturally, you see the greener and the yellow ones are the ones that have the faster speeds. Western Europe, North America, etc. Right? The rest of the world is kind of lagging behind. Now we can think about it and say, well, it's only time until networks catch up. I've had very interesting conversations here and they're saying, oh, geo is going to change things. It's just a matter of getting into the country, right? Well, let's look at it from a global scale. Should be speaking into the mic. Okay, so let's look at it on a global scale. That this is data for the last 10 years. So you see that on the top you have United Kingdom, United States, and at the bottom, the green and the blue is China and India. There has always been a gap, of course, the last 10 years. You look at where it has come to 2016. There's naturally a gap, and the gap has gone wider. I mean, there was a report that came out of the World Economic Forum that said, there are like 7, 8 countries in the world that are advancing at such a fast rate, including Singapore, I think it was Sweden, and a whole bunch of US, of course, a whole bunch of other countries that are advancing at such a rapid rate that it's going to be very difficult for other countries to catch up. That's the rate at which it's going. So, here are some stats. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are some of the stats that we've used as premise for building RightMesh. 4 billion of the users lack connectivity. However, there is an abundance of smartphones. That's interesting, right? There's a lack of electricity, but most people have mobile phones. Not necessarily smartphones, but they have mobile phones, which has penetrated. Network upgrades are expensive. We think that an operator like Airtel or Idea are going to spend vast amounts of money to replace their entire infrastructure in markets where they're not going to see any return. That's not going to happen, right? Digital divide still persists. The basic point of all of this is we really need to think about different ways of connecting people. Right mesh does not intend to be a replacement of the internet, nor it cannot be. But we really need to think about how information and services, valuable information and services, can be delivered across the spectrum, and not to the 1% or the top 10% of the world. And we're thinking about a different way to connect people. So the kind of infrastructure that we're creating is a mesh network, where in this case the network is owned and managed by the people. And therefore the devices, rather than having connections from a base station or from a centralized company, is actually shared and utilized. Now there may be a couple of people who have endpoints into the network, which is what is being shown, but it does not require everyone to have internet access. I'm looking at a future where users should not have to care whether they have to spend 300 rupees for a data plan or they need to access a Wi-Fi connection. It should not matter the network that I'm using. What's important is the service. Today, those meaningful services do not exist, partly because there's no value in it. There's no one who's going to invest. There's no return. But if there is valuable services for this market, then, and you can provide it at an affordable means, like how sachets kind of penetrated the market. If you remember sachets, the big FMCG companies who tried to launch these big shampoo bottles in India just could not penetrate until they brought it down to affordable prices at sachet level prices. You think about the farmer who basically just wants to know what the weather is going to be like for the next week, or basically getting information from the sensors that are deployed on his field, which will tell him, how the soil is working, stuff like that. You can combine IoT cases as well. It's actually just looking at microservices which are valuable for that user. And for that to happen, networks need to change. They fundamentally need to change. It cannot be that I need to go to the cloud and go, and then access my service. So that's the kind of philosophy that we're thinking. And of course, when you think about it, the shared economy, not talk about the shared economy. How this is going to work is that by being a participant in the mesh network, you're actually either a user or you're part of a mesh network, which means I'm a node that data is passing through me, and I'm just like a passive user in that case. And then there's probably one user who has access to the service either through the internet or through a device or whatever. So there are different types of consumers here as users. There is the developers themselves who are part of the ecosystem. You could also bring advertisers into this ecosystem. And so everybody in this economy, if you look at what I was talking about before, now either becomes a producer or consumer, or they're a contributor or shareholder of the network. It's a network that should be owned for the people, by the people. Now, when we think about it, we're talking about microservices, and I'm talking about sachet level prices. I mean, how is that going to benefit that user? And I thought this was a very interesting stat, that giving $1 to a truly poor individual is worth giving $66 to an average American. That's quite a bit. So if we can operate at this kind of scale, it can make a difference to the lives of individuals. So this is how I'm tying these three concepts together, about creating actual sharing economies, or shared economies, true peer-to-peer economies, how blockchain can actually enable that, and how it can really be used, if we think about it, for the developing world, so that it actually can leapfrog developing nations. So we're talking about sharing economy, which is the equal distribution of wealth. Blockchain, which provides a decentralized platform in terms of ownership and adding economic value to the data that you're exchanging. And for the developing world, reducing that digital divide. Now, for a lot of you, you'll probably be thinking this is really kind of radical, is what you was talking about before. Is it even practical to implement this in a system today? Agreed. This is very challenging to do. With the team that we have right now, we're a startup. With the current scale, we will not be able to do this. But that's why, an event like, say, a TG or an ICO, whatever you want to call it, is a very interesting concept, because it will allow you to grow your team. It will allow you to grow to your scale of what you want to accomplish. Now, having said that, it's not just about a white paper. When you're looking at it, why I'm saying this is that if you're thinking about an idea, and what would, let's say, prevent you from stop thinking about ideas like this? Think of an idea. You have a really good use case. You're thinking about a shared economy where users can actually contribute and benefit. You think about an economy, you think about a strong networks loops in it, and then what you have to do is it's not just about getting a white paper and ICO. Once you do that, that does not work. The basic principles of building a product still hold true. You have a concept, you need to test it out, get it to market, validate what you're doing, and then grow from there. And then you'll have to grow in stages. It's not about raising so much money and then doing whatever you want with it. You have to work at an incremental level. So finally, this is all very important to think about because technology, blockchain technology, is really only as powerful as the positive impact it makes in the world. And this requires collaboration between developers, the organizations, investors, everybody to make a difference. Thank you very much.